welcome everyone to the Virginia Cooperative Extension Plant Clinic. My name is Caitlin McKeegan and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. So these plant clinics are sponsored by the Virginia Cooperative Extension Program through Virginia's two land-grant universities, Virginia Tech and Virginia State. These plant clinics are staffed by Master Gardeners from Fairfax County Master Gardeners Association, who share science-based information about gardening and horticulture. Today's agenda, we are joined three Master Gardeners tonight, Illy Boatwright, Sylvia Liu, and Rebecca Goodhart. And so this evening, we're going to start, as we have been throughout the season, with our bug watch slide, and Susan McCracken is going to show us that. Then we'll hear from Illy, who will talk about what kinds of dry beans we can grow. Maybe some of you aren't familiar with those, and it's your first introduction to what you can grow in your garden. And then Sylvia will present information about what you can use to grow those beans on to support them, because they need a lot of space. And then Rebecca will discuss how to harvest, when and how to harvest dry beans. And of course, we'll take your questions. Susan's going to get us started tonight. She's going to talk appropriately about bean beetles, nemesi of gardeners at any point. So Susan, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. So our bug for this plant clinic is the Mexican bean beetle. Per its name, this bug is native to Mexico, but it also inhabits most states east of a lot of the area of the United States. It's in the family Coccinellatae, which includes ladybugs, and it actually resembles them as an adult. But this ladybug relative is one of the two species of this family that are not beneficial. The other is called the squash lady beetle. Now, if you grow beans, you are going to experience this pest because beans are host plants for this insect. They love snap and lima beans, and they'll also live on cowpea, black-eyed pea, and soybeans. Mung, adzuki, velvet bean, alfalfa, and clover, oddly enough, are also at risk. The adult beetle overwinters, and when the weather warms, they come out and start feeding. And after they've fed, then they start laying eggs, and they will lay up to 500 to 600 bright yellow eggs, which they lay in clusters. These larvae, depending on the weather, the warmer it is, the faster they'll hatch. They can hatch up to a week later after being laid. And once they hatch, they're really aggressive feeders, and they'll feed in mass, and they can do a lot of damage really quickly. They're such voracious feeders that if the leaf is dry, they'll eat on the unhatched eggs. So they don't let anything stand in the way of their jaws. Once the larva pupates, it fastens its end of the abdomen and wiggles forward out of its skin, leaving that skin till it's attached with only the tip of the abdomen in the skin. And this stage lasts about 5 to 10 days. I think I've caught a few at that stage. But once they get past that stage, they're adults. As an adult, they resemble ladybugs, but their color is different. It's orange to copper. And one way of telling them is they have 16 black spots on their back in 3 distinct rows of 6, 6, and 4. Now, it's really hard to miss the damage that these bugs do. They pretty much eat every bit of the bean plant, the leaves, the flowers, the pods. The larva is the most destructive of the life cycle. These larvae cling to the bottom of the leaf, and they eat like crazy to the point where they totally skeletonize the leaf. And that can really impact your harvest, your yield. How to protect yourself? One way to do it is with row covers. If you put those row covers down when you plant your plants, then the adult bugs cannot get to the plant to lay their eggs. Another way to manage them, especially in a small garden, is just to pick everything off. So lift the leaf, look up underneath, kill anything you find, crush the egg, crush the larva, crush the bug if you can get it. You could use beneficial insects. There are a lot of natural beneficial insects, but there's a wasp that you could buy, but that's really not great for a small garden. That's really for a much larger area. If you need to use insecticides, you can use spinosad, neem, or pyrethrum. One of your best management tools really is the good cultural practice of pulling out all infected plants and destroying them. Don't compost them, don't let them lay on the soil. Get rid of them, because you don't want to give that adult anywhere to live over the winter and allow them to come and start their cycle all over again next season. So here are a few resources I used, and I hope you don't find this pest on your beans, but if you have beans, you will probably find this pest. Caitlin?
Thanks, Susan. That's all really great information that all of us can use, and some good cultural practices for just about any garden pest that you see as well. Our next presenter is Illy Boatwright, who's here to talk about the kinds of dry beans we can grow in our garden. And so Illy, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you. And if you just want to say next slide, we'll advance those for you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. My name is Illy Boatwright, and I'm going to go ahead and discuss what types of dry beans we can grow. So what is a dry bean? So there's actually a dry bean is just a type in terms of the various beans that we have. We're probably familiar with snap beans, shell beans. Dry beans are the ones where we use the seed pod in dry form for food or for production like that. So they're produced in pods and they belong to a family of plants called legumes. A legume is a plant that produces seeds in a pot. So it's a little fruit within that pot. And once it dries, they're ready for harvest. And once they're completely dry. Now, most of these dry beans are grown in this country, belong to the species Phyllus vulgaris, or the common bean. The shape of the seed distinguishes it from peas and lentils, where peas are completely round and lentils are flat. Beans can be either like kidney shaped or oval shaped or within that. They are high in protein, phosphorus, zinc, iron, vitamin B1, and fiber, and among other nutritional traits. They are an important staple food in many areas of the world, especially in Central and South America and Africa. You probably already are very much familiar with the variety of dry beans that we have. From the top of the head is our kidney beans, a favorite with red beans and rice. Navy bean, a very favorite in terms of white chili or navy bean soup. Pinto beans for everybody who loves those refried tacos. Refried beans come from the humble pinto bean. Black bean, if you're ever enjoy black bean soup, or for those who love their veggie burgers, black bean is used as a high protein ingredient for that to give it that texture as well. Cowpeas, even though it says peas within the name, it's not actually a pea. Cowpeas, like black-eyed peas, are also a variety of dry bean. And then of course there's lima beans, lovely, yummy, whether it be in a salad or a stew as well. Some other ones that you probably may think of are like garbanzos. Garbanzo beans are also ones, red beans or pink beans or cranberry beans as well. There's so many varieties out there and different cultivators based on for whatever need, whether it be a stew, salad, or if you want it for a filling or a dip. Dry beans are just a delicious, delicious veggie to be able to go ahead and utilize for the garden. Kidney bean, it is a common bean, Phyllus vulgaris. Now these come in two different main colors, whether it be a light and dark red variety, and they're named because for their red color and their shape, just because they have the shape of a kidney bean. Again, this one can be used in stews, soups, salads, or dips. I love the kidneys in red beans and rice. Get your roux and go ahead and have that, and it's just super, super, super delicious. The navy bean. This again is also the common bean, Phyllus vulgaris. It is a small white bean with an oval, slightly flattened shape. Again, it can be used whether in stews, soups, and pies. Interestingly enough, for a bean pie. The pinto bean, again, it is also the common bean, Phyllus vulgaris. It is a medium-sized oval brown speckled bean, and this is the one that can be used with soups, refried beans, tacos, baked beans, and various fillings. Black bean, again, it is also a common bean, Phyllus vulgaris. It is a small, oval, black, and shiny bean. Can be used in stews, soups, salads, tacos, and fillings. Cowpeas. So with this, as I mentioned before, cowpeas are not a common bean. They're actually from genus Vigna unguiculata. And it comes in a variety of colors. The most well-known is the black-eyed pea, which is a white oval bean with a black eye. There's also some native Virginia cowpeas. They're small, brown. I actually came upon them during a seed saver exchange a couple of years ago, and that was a fun bean to go ahead and grow. Most cowpeas generally tend to either be used either in salads, dips. I've also seen them in stews and soups as well. But again, just because it says cowpea on there, it's not an actual pea. It is a bean and can be utilized as a dry bean. Lima bean. So lima bean is a different type. A bean is called Phelsis lunatus. It is a large white bean with an oval flattened shape. This one can be utilized in stews, soups, and salads and dips. While most folks do use them in its tender form while it's fresh, they do utilize it as a dry bean where they go ahead and wait for it to be completely dry in the husk before being able to harvest them as a dry bean. All these beans grow very well in our area here in Northern Virginia. And they're all come in various, whether it be a pole bean, which is where these are the ones that are vining types. They tend to grow up to 6 feet and sometimes taller. The next presentation is just going to go ahead and provide more information on trellises, how to be able to trellis them. Bush beans are just nice, tight, compact areas that you'll be able to go ahead and grow that don't need any kind of support. And half runner vines are the ones that can usually grow maybe up to 3 feet, and they can benefit with some support, but don't totally need to. As long as you're able to go ahead and provide the environment that it needs in terms of making sure that you pre-germinate them, do it in spring, make sure you go ahead and just provide it at least 6 hours of full sun. They're very, very, very easy to grow. I harken the days back into my science class back in middle school where we would go ahead and grow some beans just by moistening a little paper towel with water and then watching them grow before you go ahead and put them over in little Dixie cups. So some cool thing about beans is that it is an Appalachian staple, especially in Appalachia. There is an enormous amount of genetic diversity right here in Appalachia than anywhere else in the world, with a variety of heritage beans that have more fiber and protein per serving. Now, most of these are considered string beans, but there are varieties that can be used as dry shelled beans, such as the October Tender Hull, Turkey Craw, Cold Camp, and Fat Man. These heritage beans are a great way to promote seed saving and to ensure their legacy. I would highly recommend that you check your local seed savers group, or perhaps specialize online, or even if you just go ahead and go into Appalachia, there are so many families that literally have these heritage beans that they have passed down from generation to generation. They're just completely unique to Appalachia and very, very tasty. Here are my resources regarding dry beans. I highly recommend you go ahead and just review them and go over them. They'll be able to provide more information regarding growing varieties. Highly encourage everybody to go ahead and really go into the heritage beans. There are such a vast variety of colors and shapes and just taste, and just a lot of them have some deep history, especially around Appalachia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Illy. That's great information. Susan, do you have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we have a question from Sylvia. For Illy, can you grow dry beans that you get from the supermarket?
Yes, you can. I've actually done that before when I was little. You can go ahead and grow dry beans because that's essentially what they are. They're just the dry fruit that has been completely dried. So as long as you select a bean that isn't cracked or broken in terms of the outer shell, you can go ahead and utilize them, just plant them and they'll grow.
Do you need to soak them first?
I would recommend in regards to, you can pre-germinate them. So you can go ahead and soak them, or the tried true method of just like getting them in a wet, damp paper towel and then placing them in a nice warm area. But you can just go ahead and just put them, I just go ahead and put them in my two by four little, if you want to transplant them, or you can just directly into the ground.
Great, thank you. No other questions, Caitlin?
Great. Well, growing beans seems pretty easy, and you had a great overview. I love the little bit of local history about beans of Appalachia, so that's really cool. All right, so our next presenter is Sylvia. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how you support those beans in your garden.
Yes, thank you so much. Eliana, thank you for answering my question. I think you just gave me, because the recipe that you mentioned, you gave me so much inspiration to go down the supermarket aisle now and think about different beans I can grow from the supermarket.
Oh, definitely. What would be cool if you go to some of the ones that have like the high quality ones, whether it be Wegmans or Whole Foods, they have all different types of beans there that you can just go ahead and just try. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Or really just go to one of the local seed savers. There's plenty that would be more than willing to go ahead and exchange some beans like that you might like to go ahead and try.
That's very good information. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem.
All right, so I'm going to talk about how to grow dry beans. So you heard from Ileana that there are many different type of beans. But what's interesting is that within a type of beans, there are different varieties. So in terms of growing dry beans, as Ileana had mentioned, you need full sun, which means that you need at least 6 hours of sun every day. Usually for beans, you can put the bean seeds directly in the soil after the danger of frost has passed. For certain type of variety of beans, specifically the bush beans, you can do succession planting, which means that every 2 to 3 weeks you can plant new seeds. That way you will ensure you have successive harvesting throughout the summer and into probably early fall. It's important for the root zone of the bean plant to be moist. So it's important to water deeply and regularly, especially during the dry period. Weeding is important as well, but I have to admit I am not all that good with weeding, and the beans seems to be okay. Like the problem with the weeds is that it takes away nutrients in the soil. So if you have weeds growing next to the beans, your beans are not getting the maximum amount of nutrient that they can get from the soil. So when I look at my bean plants, I sometimes ignore the weeds, and then when it gets to a point where I couldn't ignore them, I will weed them. But it's a good idea to just remove young weed seedlings and then put mulch down to keep the weed seed from germinating. So as I've mentioned before, there are different varieties of beans. So you heard from Eliana, there are different type of beans. For example, there are kidney beans and there are cowpeas. There are different type of beans. But within, for example, kidney beans, there are different varieties. And some varieties are called bush beans. And for bush beans, there's another name for them, which is snap beans. They tend to mature earlier. Well, they tend to mature in a shorter period of time. So they mature between 50 to 60 days after planting. The other variety is pole beans. So as their name suggests, they usually go up a pole. And they take a little longer to mature. They usually take between 60 to 110 days after planting to mature. So as I mentioned before, succession planting would work very well for bush beans, but might not work as well for pole beans, because pole beans, they just take a little longer to mature before you can harvest them. So growing bush beans. A bush bean is in some ways easier to grow because they just tend to grow on their own in an upright form. So you don't need trellis, you don't need any sort of support. They just grow like most plants. They're not like a vine, so they can support their own weight. They're usually pretty short. You usually don't get, they're probably between 2 feet to 3 feet as mature plants. So they're shorter, and when you harvest them, you find that the beans are, or the bean pods are closer to the ground. So bush beans, they work exceptionally well for small spaces, such as raised bed, planters, or a square foot garden, which is raised bed with grids. And for pole beans, you do need support. So that is the big difference between the two varieties. For one, the bush beans, they can support their own weight, whereas pole beans, they need to climb up something, such as a trellis, a cage, or a stake. So you can see in the picture here, it's a picture I took back in June 2018. And I just got some wood together and put them together and planted some pole beans underneath them. So to prepare for the pole beans to start climbing up. And then you see the next picture, this is about a month later, they really do climb and they really do grow quite quickly. Within a month, you can see it's covering the trellis completely. So the benefits of using a trellis or a cage or a stake is that it can maximize the use of available space. This is called vertical planting. So instead of sort of having the plants go all on the ground, it goes up. Also with a trellis, it facilitates better air movement. You get higher quality crop, and you can also harvest the beans a lot easier. I inadvertently did an experiment. I was planting the same type of beans. One I provided a trellis for, they were pole beans. One I provided a trellis for and the other I didn't, just because I didn't get to put a trellis down and I just sort of forgot about them. And I could tell the quality of the crop was completely different. I did not get as much beans in the ones that didn't have a trellis, and a lot of the beans I did get were damaged because they were on the ground. I think various insects or animals were able to get to the crops a lot easier, whereas the same type of beans that I grew on a trellis, it was night and day. So when you plant pole beans, be sure to have a trellis or some sort of support for the plant. So there are different type of support you can provide. A trellis is a very common one. Here's a picture of a tripod trellis. You essentially just put a couple of poles together and you tie them on top so they form kind of like a tripod. You can use different type of material for trellis. This one is the material that's used is bamboo. There are also other ways to support the beans. This is a method called stake and weave. So you put stakes on the ground and then you put wires around the pole so the bean can rely on the wire to grow up. And also you can use tomato cages. I think we see that pretty often when we're growing tomatoes, but the same equipment could be used for growing beans as well. You just simply need some sort of support for the pole beans to climb up. And also some people are very creative and innovative. They can make homemade natural material cages. Again, it could be anything, any material you can think of that you can use to provide support for the pole bean to climb up and grow. So for this presentation, I reviewed these resources. I think if you have time and if you're interested in growing beans, both bush beans and pole beans, these are good resources to take a look at to give you a better understanding of the different varieties. And I hope you would grow some beans because it's a very easy crop to grow and it's very rewarding.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's a great overview. A lot of different options for people of different gardening skills and looks like craft skills as well for some of those last slides that you showed. So thank you, Sylvia. Again, that was just a great overview. So tonight, our final presentation is going to be from Rebecca Goodhart, who's going to talk about how you harvest your beans.
Yeah.
We are ready to talk about the fun part of harvesting your beans after you've put in all that hard work and grown big, beautiful bean plants. We want to be able to get to the good part of keeping them and being able to use them. First, we're going to talk about when to harvest the beans. So you want to harvest them when the pods are dry. As we talked about earlier, varieties can take up to about 110 days to mature. You want the pods to be dry enough that the beans inside are rattling, but not too dry, because if they dry too much, the pods will crack and you will lose the beans before you're able to harvest them. All pods may not ripen at the same time, so you'll have to go back and check and just be able to find them when they get to that kind of right level of dryness. So there's a couple different ways you can go about actually harvesting the beans. You can remove the individual pods from the plants. Again, when they're completely dry. You can also remove the entire plant or cut the plant off at soil level so that you can get to them. You can spread the pods or the plants out in the sun on a tarp or in a sheltered place so they can dry out for a few days. And then there's a number of ways you can get to the beans inside the pods when you are ready to do that after they've dried for a few more days. You can either individually shell them out by hand. Pods should be able to open very easily. So you can just crack them open with your hand, get the beans out. If you're doing larger batches, I've read all sorts of creative ways to get to the beans. You can either put them in a pillowcase or a sack, get all your pods in there, and then thresh it with, hitting it with a stick or something so that the beans separate from the pods. Or you can stomp them, so lay them out on a tarp and kind of walk over them until the beans come out. So many ways to do it depending on how many beans you're trying to harvest at one time. Once you get that done, you are going to have a lot of plant matter left that can be composted, or you can actually return it to the garden. You will need to get the small bits of plant matter from the beans through a winnowing process. So one of the best ways to do that is to spread the beans out on a screen or something that will allow small bits to fall through it. Put it in front of a fan or take it out on a windy day and just kind of move the beans around so that the small bits of plant matter attached to them fall out. And then once you have all of your beans, they can actually be stored indefinitely, at least for a couple of years, either in a plastic, glass, container, bag, and just kept in the pantry or wherever until you're ready to use them. I just have some references that we used in the making of this presentation. So more places that you can go to find out more information and lots of step-by-step instructions and things.
Thank you, Rebecca. So it sounds like from all three of these presentations tonight, beans are something that maybe a lot of us aren't familiar, dry beans, I'm sorry, are something that a lot of us aren't familiar putting in our garden, but it's a really easy thing to grow, high reward, really fun. So, and lots of opportunities to learn things. So really, really great presentations tonight.
In terms of storing beans, do you know, in your research, did you determine if paper bags might be a good place to, a good way of storing them?
I didn't actually see anything specific to paper, but I don't see why that wouldn't work. I know at home I store them in glass jars typically because I have lots of them on hand, but I certainly think that paper could work.
Okay, thank you. Can the harvested beans be used as seeds for the next year?
Yes, absolutely.
The easiest plant ever, right? You grow them, it's easy to harvest. You can plant them again next year. You don't have to, like saving tomato seeds seems like it's a lot harder. So grow dry beans in your garden. This is a really cool thing to do. So I think we have one question from our guest, and he's interested in growing dry beans but can you grow them in containers?
Yes. So as I mentioned in my presentation, there are two major variety of beans. You have bush beans and you have pole beans. For bush beans, as they don't grow very high, they definitely will work in a container because they don't use very much space and they don't grow very high and they can self-support their own weight. For pole beans, I think growing in a container will work as well, but you just have to make sure that you have some sort of pole, some sort of support for the beans to climb, because beans are nitrogen fixers, so they tend to attract nitrogen and then put it back into the soil that they grow. They do very well in small space and they grow very well in a container.
One thing that we probably should mention is these plants are going to need sun. So, some decks may not have enough sun. So you need to make sure you're going to get like, what do you think, Sylvia? A good 8 hours of sun a day?
Yes. Beans are plants that need full sun. So yes, at least 6, but 8 would be ideal, but more the merrier. I think that would help with the bean production as well as the growth of the plant. So you're right. I think that's a very good point. Like certain area wouldn't work even if you're planting the plants in the container.
Thank you all for your presentations tonight. It was really outstanding and a lot for us to think about and some fun ways that we can all go experiment in our gardens. So before I move on to this slide, we do have a few bean recipes that we're going to post in the chat just now. This is my favorite part of the whole thing. So why do we grow all the things in our vegetable gardens? It's so we get to eat them. It's always fun to think of new ways to use all the stuff we grow. So before we wrap up tonight, we have been talking throughout the season about garden journaling. And this can help you track what works in your garden, what doesn't, what insects you're seeing at what time of year, weather patterns, diseases, what went bonkers. We were just talking before the clinic about, how last year some people had a great year for peppers and terrible tomatoes and others had the opposite experience. So making note of those things is going to help you just be a better, more observant gardener. This week, some important things to note. We've had a really dry period. It's not been quite so hot the last couple of days, but it's been really dry. What have you planted this year and how's it doing? And were there any spring crops, early spring crops like lettuces and arugula, things like that you've pulled out? And do you have a plan to replace those with later season vegetables to take their space? And every gardener's bane are weeds. How are those doing in your garden and how much pressure are you under? So, consider taking notes. You don't have to write, extensive diary entries every day, but it's just a nice way to observe what's happening in your garden. So to register for future sessions and to find any additional lots and lots of additional resources, including articles and recommendations and things like that, you can visit fairfaxgardening.org. All of our virtual registration links are posted there. And then we have been recording all these plant clinics and we started hosting them during the summer of the pandemic, summer 2020, and all of these recordings are available on YouTube. So if you have a question about anything, I bet you can find a video that answers that question for you. In addition to the virtual plant clinic presentations, you'll also see our Lunch and Lawn series about turf care and winterizing your lawn, as well as our Zone 7 garden series from the past 2 years. So like I said, tons of great information on our YouTube site. So again, I just want to thank all of you for attending tonight, for your questions and your attention. Good luck growing beans in your garden. And so again, thank you so much. We hope to see you again soon.